Hello students, it's your history teacher and I'm here with another online lecture and a new topic. I will talk about World War II, but as it is a very wide topic, today I will only do the first part of it. So to study with me, open your book History is Not a Mystery on page 155. So World War II, part 1. The very first thing we need to mention is that it was the biggest conflict in the history of the whole world, and it's known as the World War II or the Second World War because it was the second global conflict in the history that lasted from 1939 to 1945. Nearly every country was involved in this war, from the USA to Japan. So that's why it is called World War. In comparison to World War I, where we had just only one powder keg, so only, let's say, one place that was the center of all of the tensions. Before the World War II, there were more of such places. The first conflict, for example, was in 1930s, and it was the Second Italo-Abyssinian War. You know Italy, but you probably don't know Abyssinia. You know, it's the name for Ethiopia. So this was the war between Italy and Ethiopia, and it's important for us to mention because what happened is that Italy was quite successful from the beginning, and mostly because they broke what we call Geneva Protocol. In Geneva in Switzerland, there was a meeting where the agreement was reached about prohibition of poisonous gas. If you remember, this was commonly used in World War I, and after this war, it was considered to be very cruel and non-ethical. But the Italians broke this agreement and they used the poisonous gas in Ethiopia, and beside other things, they also bombed civilian targets and even hospitals. The Ethiopia was defeated in the end, and it was declared as a part of Italian Empire. But the fighting was still going on in this area. Besides Africa, there were also tensions in Asia. Everything started when Japan attacked China. Japanese were superior in technical field and they had higher standard of living than China, but the one thing they did not have was space. So they were overpopulated, they had overproduction, and they needed some space, they needed colonies. Also, when they had lack of land, they missed minerals, raw materials, oil, all of these natural resources. So that's why they decided to attack China. So they conquered the entire Chinese coast, including industrial centers such as Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai, Canton. So you can see that it was not just about Europe, but I will move to Europe just now. Because in this situation, Hitler permanently violated the conditions of the Versailles Treaty and Locarno Treaty, but it's not so important for us now. It has also a lot to do with territorial disputes after the First World War. So, from the Paris Peace Conference that Germany was treated as an aggressor in the First World War. It was blamed a war guilt, really harsh restrictions were put in Germany, there was economic crisis, and Hitler was on his way to change the situation of Germany. He introduced conscription, expanded the army, occupied the Rhineland, that was demilitarized zone, as was established in Versailles system. And he was also kind of interested in two more countries. The first one was Austria, because Austria was natural ally of Germany. Because of the ethnicity, of the language, culture, they're really close. And the second country was just after the First World War, newly created Czechoslovakia. I will just mention that. But the first thing I want to talk about is that why nobody said anything when Hitler was breaking all of the promises that Germany gave in Versailles Treaty. He broke all of the restrictions, all of the rules, and nobody said anything. Probably The only answer is that people were so afraid of the war that they were hoping for the best, and they thought that when Hitler will get anything he wants, there will be peace in Europe. But it was the exact opposite of what it actually meant. This policy, that by the way is called policy of appeasement, alebo po slovensky politika ústupkov, was proclaimed by the British government and its leader, Prime Minister Arthur Neville Chamberlain. British Prime Minister and British government was a leader of the European policy, so Great Britain was a very important voice for all of the Europe. So when Great Britain proclaimed this policy, the other countries agreed with that. In fact, Mr. Chamberlain was responsible for increasing the confidence and power of Germany. So Germany had all of the confidence to annex Austria. So in March 1938, Austria's Anschluss caused Hitler's power to grow again, and the military situation of Czechoslovakia became hopeless. The only answer of the European powers was a formal protest. The next and the last Hitler's request was the annexation of the Czechoslovak border regions. This was mostly the area we call Sudetenland. You can see it in the map in your book, and it's the area in the western Bohemia that was chosen by Hitler because this area was inhabited by 3 million Germans, and Hitler asked for this territory because he wanted to expand, but the fact that the Germans inhabited this territory was used as a pretext to this act. Czechoslovakia, of course, was not really happy about this because this area was very industrial and so important for the country. But our allies, the other European powers, had a policy of appeasement. So the only answer of the European powers was a formal protest. Since summer 1938, the relationship between Czechoslovakia and its Western allies was getting worse and worse. Britain and France asked Czechoslovakia to accept German demands, so there will be peace. And so, the Munich Conference was summoned, where the Munich Pact was signed. It was signed by Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Edward Daladier for France, and Arthur Neville Chamberlain for the Great Britain. I didn't need to tell you that Hitler was for Germany and Mussolini for Italy. So, as you can see, there was no representative for Czechoslovakia. Well, they did not think that it's important because Germany asked for this land, they were determined to give him this land, and if Czechoslovakia would make any protest, it would have been blamed a war guilt, so it would have been Czechoslovakia's fault that there's war because the Western allies told us to give that territory up. So after this pact was signed, Czechoslovakia lost land, heavy industry, and also fortification. What is very important because your question could be, why did we not defend ourselves? Well, they took our fortification. They took a great place of our territory, also with people, and nobody would help us. So that's why it was not like a realistic solution. This event is also called the Munich betrayal because, for example, especially the French attitude was incomprehensible because the France was our closest ally after the establishment of Czechoslovakia. So the Munich Pact definitely questioned the Versailles Treaty. When the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was established in March 1939, Hitler had gained Czechoslovakian gold and financial stock, military equipment, and mainly productive industry. This is what I will talk about in the next unit. That will be only about our national history from the establishment of Czechoslovakia until the Velvet Revolution. So in 1939, after the Munich Pact was signed, or the Munich Betrayal, also it is called the Munich Dictate because they only dictated us what we have to do. The Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was created from the Czech part of Czechoslovakia, and Slovak state was created from the Slovak part of Czechoslovakia. Well, the difference was that Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was the occupied land, and Slovak state was a satellite. So we were an ally of Nazi Germany. So that was the difference. Okay, well, the appeasement policy did not stop the war. It only accelerated the start of the war. The USSR negotiated with both sides, with the Western powers to avoid German aggression and with Germany to create the coalition. During the Russian negotiations with Western diplomats in Moscow, German Minister of Foreign Affairs Joachim von Ribbentrop and Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Vyacheslav Molotov signed an agreement that is known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It is also titled as the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Soviet Union. For me, it's enough to know Molotov-Ribbentrop, or like non-aggression treaty. This was great shock for many countries, mostly for the Western countries that considered Russia to be its ally, but also for the communists. Due to this pact, Poland should have been divided between Germany and the USSR, and the Baltic states and Romania should have been under the Soviet control. Hitler triumphed in diplomacy, and a war could start. So far we discussed everything what led to the actual war, okay? So we're still in the beginning of the year 1939 when everything was prepared to the actual start. Now there is a date that I really want you to remember, and it's the start of the World War II, and it's the September the 1st, 1939. To study about that, you have to open your book on a page 157. So here we are. What triggered World War II? It started when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and after that France and Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. First of all, how this attack happened. I suppose that some of you could hear the story before. I hope so, at least, but I will tell you once again. So the attack on the Gliwice radio station staged by Germans was a pretext to the war. It was a false flag attack on the German radio station Sender Gliwice that was staged by Nazi Germany on the night of 31st of August 1939. So the Germans dressed up like the Poles, and they transmitted the announcement in Polish that was saying something about the invasion to Germany, but it was not true, and Germany used this to justify the invasion of Poland, which began the next morning, even though there was the whole army waiting for that announcement on the borders. Well, what happened? Poles were abandoned. Great Britain and France declared war on Germany, but it was only a declaration. In fact, they did not fight against the Wehrmacht. Wehrmacht is German army, so it's the name for German army, okay? Wehrmacht. Please remember that. And these Western allies did not provide any help, not even support. Polish people and troops were determined to fight the Germans, but they were equipped just with old-fashioned armaments, and they were not able to resist the modern German army. While the German tanks were rolling forward, bombers bombed targets regardless of whether they were military or just civilian. This kind of war that is like rapid movement of motorized units like tanks, and it's also supported from the skies like by the Luftwaffe, which was Air Force. It's called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, because it's very strongly pushing into the territory. Okay, Blitzkrieg. That is very important. In the First World War, we had Schlieffen Plan that was activated, and in the Second World War, we have Blitzkrieg. On the 17th of September 1939, the Red Army attacked Poland too. That is what they agreed on in Non-Aggression Treaty, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So that was it in the practice. Then we have their Russo-Finnish War. That was a war waged by the Soviet Union against Finland. Finnish towns were bombarded, and Soviet headquarters was convinced that victory was close, but a small, well-equipped and organized Finnish army demonstrated an effective defense against the big and inept Germany. Finally, Finland was defeated and lost Karelia. So that's the huge part of Finland. That's basically a peninsula. When the USSR was invaded in 1941, Finland was Germany's ally because, the rule of the old times, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So far, Germany controlled Protectorate, Bohemia and Moravia. They had Slovak state as a satellite. They had half of the Poland because the other half belonged to the Soviets. And in April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. These countries were important strategic places because of the Baltic Sea. Because of the using of the Blitzkrieg, this invasion happened just within the days. So you can see that it started in April 1940, and in the beginning of May, they already controlled Denmark and Norway. On 10th of May, 1940, Germans started the invasion to the west. They conquered the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. Again, this happened just within a few days. For the French, this was a real disaster. Concrete fortifications of the famous Maginot Line, what is named for all of these walls that were built from concrete as the protection against the Germany, had been circumvented or overcome by the German paratroopers. So the Germans could find a way how to easily overcome this Maginot Line. It was not all around France. It was just close to the border with Germany. Paris was conquered, and as it always is, when the capital is defeated, the whole country is defeated. So Hitler reached Paris, and all of the French and British forces had to retreat. The last place where they retreated to was Dunkirk. I can't show it to you in the map because it doesn't show all of the Europe, but it's actually very close to the Great Britain because it's on the coast of La Manche, and from this place French and British soldiers were evacuated mostly by the British volunteers. These forces, they had to wait on the coast for their saviors, but the ships that came for the soldiers from Great Britain were bombarded by the German aircrafts. So these people were evacuated by all possible vessels, including private fishing boats. It was the biggest evacuation in history. By the way, there's a movie about it called Dunkirk if you want to watch. So this Operation Dynamo that happened in Dunkirk had great success, but still, Germany had so far Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, Slovakia as an ally, half of Poland, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. So most of the Europe. The northern part of France was occupied by the Germany, and the French state was created in the south of France. It was called the Vichy France because the capital of this part was the city of Vichy, and government led by Marshal Philippe Pétain, who by the way fought in the Battle of Verdun in the First World War, collaborated with the Germans because he was the most famous person of the French resistance. Okay, I will move to the Great Britain. That was another target of the Germans, mostly of its Führer Adolf Hitler. So in the war situation, a policy of appeasement could not be accepted anymore even by the inhabitants of Great Britain. So Arthur Neville Chamberlain was replaced by the Winston Churchill, who I hope all of you know. When he took the job, he said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." He strengthened British radar system and aircraft defense. The Great Britain was lucky because it was a strong military power in the skies and in the seas. So the Battle of Britain that started in the summer of 1914 was won by the Great Britain. Well, it was not the ordinary war. The German planes attacked Great Britain, and brave RAF fighters, RAF stands for Royal Air Force, were about to stop them. There were even 88 Czechoslovaks among them. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few, was another statement of Winston Churchill to this RAF pilot. The Battle of Britain was the first Hitler's failure in the World War II. All these attacks caused high material damage and casualties, and the situation of Great Britain that was alone in this was still critical. Also, there was a great idea of Hitler to destroy the British spirit and their hope, but they didn't manage to do so, fortunately. At the same time as was the Battle of Britain, Italy tried to capture Greece and started a fight in North Africa. In 1941, Mussolini asked Hitler for help. The Afrika Korps, that were the German troops, the army fighting in Africa, that was led by Erwin Rommel, who was also nicknamed Desert Fox. I will mention that on our next online lecture on Thursday. It started to fight against Britain in North Africa. During the spring of 1941, Hitler used the conflict between Croats and Serbs and occupied Yugoslavia. Other countries like Slovakia, as I mentioned, the Slovak state, but also Romania and Hungary became Germany's allies, so the fascist state. Almost the whole of Europe was under control of Nazis. So these were either defeated countries or the satellites, the allies. On the 22nd of June 1941, Wehrmacht, so German army, attacked the USSR. Stalin could not believe that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was violated, so cancelled. This mission, so the invasion of the USSR, was called Operation Barbarossa. Okay, that's important. For Hitler, it was very successful from the beginning, but as many other generals before, the Germans did not count with Russian nature and mostly with Russian winter. So Hitler was successful because by November, an area populated by 40% of the Soviet population was occupied. 3 million Russian soldiers became prisoners of the war. Leningrad, so today's St. Petersburg, was surrounded, and in December, German army Wehrmacht stood in front of Moscow, so the capital was under reach. But fortunately, 2 long supply lines and a cruel Russian winter caused the German offensive to be stopped. Brutal terror started on the occupied Soviet territories. People were killed or moved to create Lebensraum for Germans. This Lebensraum means living space, because this was mostly why they invaded these countries. You know, that they felt that the Aryans, the Germans, are superior over the others and they deserve more space in the world, okay? And the other inferior people should live somewhere else. So in this desperate situation, the guerrilla warfare started, so like the partisan campaigns. The Red Army, so the Russian army, started to use a scorched earth policy, so like burned land policy. Due to this method, anything that might be useful for the enemy was destroyed or burned while withdrawing from an area. And the last continent that I haven't mentioned so far, apart from Australia maybe and South America, is North America. We know that in the First World War, the America had the policy of isolationism because it was great economy and it did not feel like interfere to the European matters. So it only changed after the sinking of Lusitania. Now it was very similar, but it was not the Germany who made the United States to go to the war. It was Japan. It happened on December 7th, 1941, when Japanese plane attacked Pearl Harbor. This was an American Pacific naval base. Surprise of this attack was perfect. 4 American battleships were sunk, 4 were damaged. The US naval power was broken. 3 aircraft carriers were not in harbor during this attack. They were saved for the next very important struggle. The USA was in war against Japan and its allies, because I will show you in the next slide. The 2 alliances of the World War II were the Axis powers and the allies. Okay, so no Central Powers. It was in the First World War. I know it can be like quite confusing to have it done in one test, but you have to practice this according to the online lectures and to your book. So the Axis powers were Germany, Italy, Japan, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. The Allies, as you can see, there were more of them. So Britain, France, USSR, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, China, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, South Africa, and Yugoslavia. You can also add Slovak state to the Axis, even though there were Czechoslovaks fighting for the Allies, but these were the part of the resistance, like official Slovak government was German oriented, so belonged to the Axis. Okay, so that's it for today. The most important thing for me is the policy of appeasement. Munich Pact, that is also called Munich Betrayal, and took as the Sudetenland. Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And what was the deal between the USSR and Nazi Germany? Why they even decided to do this? Then I wanted to know when the Second World War started and how. That the Germans were involved in this conspiracy and this whole pretext, and that the Soviets invaded Poland as well. I wanted to know the progress of Germany, so how they were approaching, and the order of the states they got under control. I wanted to remember what is a blitzkrieg, and in general, how was the Western Front and Eastern Front. So Western Front is very easy. It basically did not exist because Germany immediately got all of the Western Europe apart from Great Britain. So we can say that the Western Front was only between Great Britain and Germany and its allies. And the Western Front, so the Operation Barbarossa, a scorched earth policy, okay, and of course, I also wanted to remember the Battle of Britain, the change from the policy of appeasement to this Churchill policy that was very, confident to go to the war. And the last thing, Pearl Harbor. So what was it? Where is it? Maybe it's in Hawaii. Okay, and that it caused America to got involved to the World War II. So that's it for today's lesson. And on Thursday, there will be the second part of this topic. So until Thursday, have a good time. Bye.